Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
In 1990, Christopher impresses all teachers in school by completing a test that took Einstein 3 days in just a few hours. His older sister Michelle points out that he could go to college early, but he isn't sure he wants to go. On their way out, a soldier notices that Christopher has a cartoon robot on his t-shirt and scolds him, reminding him that war is coming. The robot on that shirt is Cosmo, the protagonist of a popular cartoon show. However, because anti-robot sentiment is growing around the nation, the show gets cancelled. Robots were first developed by Walt Disney for their parks in 1955 and later they were put into mass production, so they became the main source of workforce around the world. For years they worked without issues, but eventually they get tired of working and rebel. The robots demand rights of their own, so they organize protests all over the world led by Mr. Peanut. Debates go nowhere and soon a war between humans and robots begins. Any person keeping a robot at home is considered a traitor. War isn't going well for humans and Sergeant John appears on TV to explain why. Robots don't eat, don't sleep, and don't blink. For 2 years humanity keeps on fighting only to lose over and over again. One day the founder of Center Technologies Ethan invents the Neurocaster, a device that links the human mind to drone bodies. Now humans can fight the robot army on equal grounds, and in just 2 weeks, the war is over. Humans win and Colonel Bradbury is named the main hero. Peanut meets with Clinton and Ethan to sign the Treaty of Surrender while over 6,000 robots are imprisoned in the exclusion zone in the desert. Sometime later Ethan releases a smaller version of the Neurocaster for people to have at home. This model allows them to split their minds so they can work and have fun at the same time. In 1994 Michelle is at home trying to remove the monitor on her ankle, but she has to hide her tools when Ted bursts in using a Neurocaster. He scolds her for her behavior and reminds her that even if she escaped from all her previous foster homes, he won't let her do so here. Michelle replies by pointing at the pile of stuff he's hoarding, pointing out that taking things from the exclusion zone is illegal. Afterward she goes to class and the teacher is also there in her Neurocaster suit. All the students are forced to put on their helmets, and when Michelle refuses to do so she's sent to the principal's office. The lady notices on Michelle's profile that she lost her entire family and blames it on the war, so Michelle has to clarify it actually was a car accident. Then the principal explains that neurotherapy can help her forget for a few hours, causing Michelle to revisit a memory of playing on the beach with her brother. That day he had a panic attack and she comforted him through it. However, Michelle still refuses to put on the helmet and goes home. That night Michelle dreams of the car accident that killed her family. She had woken up in the hospital and a doctor was watching her, but she couldn't remember their face. In the present, Michelle is startled awake by a noise outside. She looks out the window and notices a shadow moving in her yard, so she grabs a flashlight and goes out. Suddenly she sees an eye reflected on a bottle before the table falls, scaring her into running back inside. She tries to warn Ted about the intruder, but he's lost in the Neurocaster world. When the intruder breaks in, Michelle runs to hide under her bed. However, the intruder is a robot and easily lifts the bed to look at her with Cosmo's face. Michelle runs to the corner of the room and tries to communicate with Cosmo, who uses some gestures to indicate he's looking for her. This robot can't speak and opens his head so Michelle can fix his voice circuit, but unfortunately he only has a few pre-recorded phrases. Then Cosmo grabs a picture of the siblings and keeps pointing between himself and Christopher, implying they're the same person. Michelle doesn't believe him and forcefully pulls the picture from his arms, causing him to crash against the shelves. The noise wakes Ted up and he comes to the room to find Cosmo. He blames Michelle for this and yells at her, triggering an argument that ends with Ted pushing her against the robot. Cosmo makes the same gesture that Christopher used to make, convincing Michelle of his story before pushing Ted against the wall. A furious Ted grabs a golf club and tries hitting Cosmo, who quickly breaks the club and pushes Ted again. This time he ends up bleeding and rushes to call 911 before Michelle tases him until he's unconscious. Afterward Michelle and Cosmo get in Ted's car and the robot easily removes the monitor from her ankle. Michelle doesn't know how to drive but improvises when Ted comes after them in his Neurocaster. The car throws him off and the duo manages to leave. The next morning the car stops in the middle of the road because it has a flat tire. Michelle checks the trunk to get the spare, but that one is broken too. She starts bothering Cosmo with questions, so he explains Christopher is alive somewhere and controlling him from afar. When Michelle asks how to find her brother, Cosmo points at Center's company logo on a sign. Using a Dr. Pepper can and more gesturing, Cosmo mentions a doctor with glasses, and Michelle thinks about waking up after the accident again. Now she remembers Dr. Amherst's face and how he told her that Christopher died in the hospital. Then Michelle takes out a map and Cosmo points at a spot in the middle of the exclusion zone. They'll need a plan to break into such a dangerous place, and Michelle remembers all the illegal things Ted bought. There's a box in the car trunk with the address of the sender's P.O. box in New Mexico, so they decide to search for that person because they may know how to get inside the zone. The duo sneaks into a train for half of the journey and continues the other half on foot. In the evening Michelle stops at a store for food, and when she comes out she sees a truck coming, so she drags Cosmo to an alley to hide. The driver turns out to be John, who opens the P.O. box the duo was looking for and gets a bunch of money out of it. Then a man appears in his Neurocaster to buy a gun from John. Suddenly the client turns the weapon and threatens to shoot John, only to get hit by an electric shot that turns the Neurocaster off. This was done by Herman, John's partner robot, who helps him move the fallen machine while discussing how to get its parts. While they're distracted, Michelle and Cosmo sneak into the back of the truck. Meanwhile, Bradbury finds Ted's abandoned car. The next day the truck arrives at an old mine near the exclusion zone. John and Herman move their latest acquisitions inside, unaware that Michelle and Cosmo are hiding in a box. While John and Herman argue over missing cables, Michelle tries to use the distraction to sneak around, but Cosmo accidentally activates a singing fish and gives away their location. When John and Herman surround them, Michelle explains she only wants a guide into the exclusion zone, but John thinks she's crazy. At that moment the elevator goes up and John concludes someone followed them, so the whole group hides. When the elevator comes back down it reveals Bradbury. He announces this place is now under the jurisdiction of the Robot Deactivation Task Force and makes John and Michelle come out with their hands up. John tries to pretend Michelle is his sister, but Bradbury recognizes her and says she's under arrest. Herman tries to shoot Bradbury with his electric beam, but Bradbury sees him and uses John as a shield. Then Bradbury opens fire, destroying big parts of the room while everyone runs to hide again. When he corners the robots, Michelle comes out and hits his arm with a fire extinguisher, only for Bradbury to steal it from her and destroy it. As the room fills with smoke, Michelle claps her hands to turn off the lights. Suddenly the fish decorations start singing again and Bradbury is distracted, so John shoots him from behind. His bullets do nothing to the Neurocaster's body and Bradbury quickly destroys his gun before grabbing John by the neck. Wanting to save him, Michelle and Cosmo surrender. After throwing John away, Bradbury starts walking toward the duo, explaining that Cosmo is marked for deactivation. At that moment Herman makes a huge crane claw fall and capture Bradbury. Then the whole group jumps into a mining car to escape, however John takes too long to find the right key and Bradbury gets enough time to escape. He shoots the cart to bring it down and tries to shoot Cosmo too, but Herman disarms him again and now both robots start fighting him. Michelle finds a bulldozer and traps Bradbury against the wall with it, causing some rocks to fall and bury him too. The mine is slowly crumbling, so the group has to rush out to save themselves. Seeing his home going down makes John scream in frustration and he yells at Michelle for ruining everything. He's interrupted by some weird noises nearby, so the group runs to hide in a cave and watch scavenger robots going around looking for parts to fix themselves. When John sees an opening, he comes out and destroys the robot so he can get into his garage, where he keeps a van and a huge suit that Herman uses to make himself bigger. After lots of arguing, Michelle convinces John to help her. Minutes later, Michelle, John, and Cosmo are inside the van, which is being carried by Herman in the suit. They enter the exclusion zone and Michelle sees all the destroyed robots on the ground. During the trip, John shares the story of how he met Herman. During the war, John's team lost a battle and was surrounded by enemies. The soldiers were supposed to be shot by the robots, but Herman saw John crying and saved him instead. A few days later the center drones found them and wouldn't listen to John when he tried to tell them Herman was good, so the duo had to run away to avoid getting killed. Meanwhile Ethan is using his